Welcome, everyone. I am Nyla Boodoo, RNS, a live events host and executive producer. As people are starting to come in, I want to welcome everyone to our virtual event today, which is about first impressions of the Pope. You can go ahead, as always, we like to welcome folks by putting in the chat where you're joining us from so we can see different places where all of you are. Those of you who are RNS events regulars will know this, but those of you can, if you can just say, great. Tyler is wonderful joining us from Tennessee. So if you guys want to just say what states or countries you're joining us from. Oh, South Wales. So Monsignor Landry, we do have people outside the US. We were just talking about that. So we're really looking forward to our conversation today. I'm sad that you guys were not part of our pre-conversation because Dr. Butler was gifting us with her the moment that she saw the smoke come out while she was on CBS. But we will maybe put a link in the chat so you guys can watch that yourself. So for those of you who are just joining us, again, I'm Nyla Boodoo. I am RNS live events host and executive producer. It is a pleasure to welcome you to our virtual event, which is First Impressions of Our New Pope. Make sure also we are going to be taking your questions. So when we get to that point in the conversation, please put your questions or comments in the chat. Our RNS producers will be monitoring that as well. Right now, of course, everyone's just saying where they're coming from, but as we get into the conversation, please feel free to put your questions and comments there. After our conversation, we will also do a Q&A portion and we'll ask people to continue to put questions in at that time. I did want to note to everyone that this event is being recorded. We will share this from tomorrow, and please feel free to share this with your networks. We know so many are already in several travels, and this is actually the final of a series of virtual events we've been doing all leading up to our in-person fall symposium. So this is the final summer event. We will be back in September with a conversation with some popular podcasters, including RNS's own Roxanne Stone, along with Simranjeet Singh and the ladies from Pantsuit Politics. We will be talking about how podcasters of faith are handling this political moment, and we will pop a link in the chat for you to register for that. I think it's fitting that we wrap up this series of virtual events where we began this spring, which was talking about Pope Francis's passing and the papal conclave. For those of you, some of you may have actually been at that event where Father Tom Rees, this was the day before the conclave started, he said during that event, we might have our first American Pope. I am obviously not a veteran Vatican watcher because as soon as he said that, I thought, fat chance, that's not happening. Which brings me to our wonderful guest that we have that I will be in conversation with, who probably had a better reaction than I had because they are very familiar with the Vatican and work for different outlets and help contribute to different outlets. From RNS, I'm based in Washington, D.C., but I want to welcome all of our panelists who are joining us from actually at this point across the world. First from RNS's Vatican reporter, Claire Giangrave. Claire, welcome.
Hi, everyone.
Dr. Anthea Butler is also with us. She's the Geraldine R. Siegel Professor in American Social Thought at the University of Pennsylvania. She's a historian of African American and American religion, and her most recent book is White Evangelical Racism, The Politics of Morality in America. Dr. Butler, thank you for being with us as well.
Thanks for having me.
Last, certainly not least, Monsignor Roger Landry is a priest of the Diocese of Fall River, Massachusetts. He's also National Director of the Pontifical Mission Societies in the United States. You can often find his commentary on EWTN, and his homilies, articles, and other videos are available free at catholicpreaching.com. Monsignor, thank you for being with us today too.
Great to be with you, Nyla, and all those joining us.
So all of you were actually at the conclave. Monsignor, as I mentioned, for EWTN. Dr. Butler, you were there for CBS and MSNBC. Claire, obviously, for RNS. You know, I just want to get straight into this conversation about our new Pope. We have this Pope who has been cheered along by so many, for example, Black Americans who were so excited about its heritage. He's already revived the idea of a papal vacation. He has already gone viral for wearing a White Sox hat. And then, of course, there's also the expected and important people moves he's made in terms of calling for peace. But can we just go back to the conclave, especially since all of you were there in Rome? I just want to go to what your first thought was when you heard he was announced, in terms of what your reaction was. And then I want to ask how you think he's lived up to that first impression. Monsignor, can I start with you?
So I was on camera and I had prepared for the election by memorizing all the names in their Latin accusatives so that as soon as Cardinal Dominique Montberti announced the first name, I would know who it wasn't and probably who it was. There were 12 different Johns there, so if Joannem came out, I was not going to be able to guess. But when Robertum came, there were only four Roberts in the entire College of Cardinals. Cardinal Robert McElroy of Washington, I didn't think he would have been elected. Cardinal Robert Sarah of Benin, who I don't think even the Holy Spirit for us as Catholics could have gotten elected. I never think that he would have gotten to 89 votes. And then Cardinal Roberto Rapole of Turin, who is one of the most progressive cardinals, and he's 54 years old, and I just thought no chance. So as soon, I was expecting, to be honest, the name Petrum for Pietro Parolin to come on out, because that was everybody's idea of the first day would be a referendum on him. And if somebody were elected by the fourth ballot, I thought it would have had to have been Parolin. And so as soon as Cardinal Lamberti said Robertum, I didn't need for him to say Franciscum or later in his Latin phrase Prevost. I knew it was an American, and I couldn't believe it. Chills were coming up my spine. It was a moment that I never thought I'd see in my lifetime. Even in the prep for it, I was doing interviews in various other languages, and most of the journalists from other countries that say, do you think there could be an American? And I said, I doubt this conclave. I doubt even in my lifetime. The small little window would be because of economic problems that the Vatican is facing. Some of the American archbishops have bigger budgets for their archdioceses than the Vatican does. At least it wouldn't intimidate them. That might just give a small chance, like a snowball in the inferno, that an American can walk out on that balcony. And boy, was I eating those words when Cardinal Mamberti announced Robertum Franciscum Sancti Romani Ecclesiae Cardinalem Prevost.
Dr. Butler?
Yeah, I had no idea. As a matter of fact, right before the smoke came out, I was like, it's going to be tomorrow, and I certainly did not think it was going to be an American. So I have to give credit to somebody who was actually up on top of the roof with me, Michael Sean Winters, who knew immediately who it was, and I was like, "Are you kidding?" He's like, "Yeah." He said, "I had a feeling it might be him." And so I want to thank him. I did up there because I was like, you have to fill me in because I don't know that much about him. And so it was a big surprise for me, actually. I just thought, as a historian of American religion, I just thought there's so much about the American Catholic Church that would freak people out if we had an American Pope, right? If I think about where I live right now in Philadelphia, where Protestants and Catholics were fighting in the streets, having an American Pope was just going to melt people down. But I am really surprised, and I'm actually very happy for lots of different reasons that we're going to get into during this conversation. So yeah, I was very surprised.
Claire?
Of course, I was surprised. I think everyone was. Anyone who says they weren't, I don't think is being completely truthful. But I will say that the name Prevost was one that kept coming up in the months leading up to the conclave, even before there was even idea that we had a conclave. But there was this sense that there was this, uh, this cardinal, this bishop who needed to be looked at and paid attention to. And then after, I mean, when his name was announced, obviously, like Monsignor, I thought it was going to be Cardinal Pietro Parolin just because of how quickly it happened. I was definitely not expecting him to come out from the loggia so soon. And so seeing him come out actually shocked me, first and foremost, because he's American, of course, but also because I thought, I spent so much time writing about how much polarization and infighting there is in the church and how much division there is in the institution. And then in 4 ballots, they all come together and vote for someone. I was shocked by this display of unity in the church. And that completely changed my way of thinking about the institution. And then I was really interested in how Pope Leo kind of used that momentum. And the days leading up to the conclave, excuse me for my voice, I had a bad cough during the weekend. There was such an interesting emotion coming during the funeral for Pope Francis. And that sense of unity, that sense of interest and cohesion, I think sort of that's what kind of grabbed my attention in those days. And the fact that this Pope, who no one thought could be elected, came out so quickly was really the most surprising and fascinating aspect as a reporter covering the Vatican for 8 years now.
And now we have Pope Leo, right? And now let's just talk about the choice of that name. Who wants to just weigh in on what you think, what to you the significance? We've seen a lot of different writings about the choice of this name, what the significance of this could be. We've heard from the Pope himself about why he picked this, but what do you want to highlight about this? Monsignor, do you want to start?
I'd say first, it points to his courage. Leo means lion, and he is a courageous guy. He's done some very difficult things. He's made some choices that could be easily criticized from the beginning of his papacy in small little ways, and he's shown that he's going to be his own guy. He's been
Like
chosen,
what?
courageous. So, like, for example, for him to come out on the balcony as soon as he was elected, wearing the mosetta and the stole, Pope Francis had chosen specifically not to do it. Anybody who would see Pope Leo coming on out without doing it might say he's trying to distance himself from Pope Francis, which clearly he wasn't. He was trying to associate himself with the papacy, etc. But that was putting himself out there, able to be criticized. Some Americans were surprised that this native son of Chicago didn't speak English the first time he came on out. But that was likewise a choice that he made. He knew that everybody would focus on where he was born. He did not want his American history to be the dominant story because we've just elected a pope, not simply an American in a situation where America's reputation throughout the world is a little bit fraught. And so we've got lots of those smaller decisions over the course of time of what he's decided to do, what he's decided not to do right yet, that shows his courage. He himself told us the reason why he chose Leo as his name. He explicitly wanted to unite himself to Pope Leo XIII, the Pope from 1878 to 1903, who basically formulated the initial steps of Catholic social teaching against the Industrial Revolution. And he wanted to do the same type of thing that Leo XIII did today with regard to the technological revolution with artificial intelligence, etc., to try to take the light of Catholic social teaching and shine it on the issue to be able to see how we're supposed to live with this reality. So for him to do that was to sort of pass by any of the particular controversies or categories people might put him in. Is he liberal? Is he conservative? You name it. Choosing Pope Leo XIII as his immediate predecessor bypassed everything if he had chosen John Paul III or Francis II or Pius XIII. It would have been a little bit more confusing for people. The fact that he chose Leo XIII, which every Catholic all over the spectrum appreciates the extraordinary heritage he's left to the church, I think that that was a totally brilliant move on his part. And it shows where his real emphases are and how he wants to serve the church and the world as the successor of St. Peter.
Dr. Butler, what stood out to you about the choice of his name also?
Well, I think Monsignor teed it up for me, but I'm going to say it a little bit differently. For me, and this tracks with what he's been saying, so I think this is an important point. It's not just the fact that he's following Leo XIII and Rerum Novarum, which was a very important encyclical for Catholic social teaching, is that he's emphasized the workers and not cheating workers. And when he talks about AI, you can't talk about AI without talking about how that's going to affect people who work. And I think one of the things that's going to be very important about his papacy is going to be his focus in on people who work honestly, people who are trying to make a living wage every day, how workers are being exploited around the world. I think this is going to be a very important part of what he was trying to signal with picking that name.
Claire, I know that we are expecting an upcoming encyclical on artificial intelligence. I believe there was a gathering at the Vatican just this past weekend or last week of Silicon Valley executives. Do we have any sense of where, of like, we've already heard a few things from the Pope, but what direction do you think he's going to go in with this?
Well, I mean, it's hard to predict and obviously where he's going to go with it, but he has already said some things that I think are very interesting. He's not afraid to hold the scientific community accountable, and he has a specific interest in truth. And I think these issues are going to be very in sort of a lens, and this comes from his Augustinian past, a lens that allows him to interpret the challenges that AI presents. A part of it is the bias that obviously programmers put within artificial intelligence. The other one is how this can be used to manipulate people and to change the way, to really influence people's thinking. We've heard the Pope speak time and time and again about how there is a need to promote critical thinking in believers, and not just believers, but everyone. So these topics, these understandings, we're going to see. I'm pretty sure we're going to see happening. And the Pope has said that he's going to go to Castel Gandolfo over the summer. He's going to be spending a couple weeks there. There happens to be a sort of university right next to Castel Gandolfo where there are some really interesting people who go there, Americans, priests, but also lay people, and talk about the intersection between artificial intelligence and ethics and Catholic social teaching, etc. So I wouldn't be surprised if this time that he's taking to go to Castel Gandolfo, which is this beautiful property about an hour away from Rome that Pope Francis did not visit, but popes before him had. Where it can offer this place for him to have a contemplative moment to reflect on the issues that are taking place today. Think about the challenges of AI and possibly have conversations with some of the movers and thinkers. I'll add one more thing. I've done some reporting, and people might think, what does the Vatican have to say about artificial intelligence? I mean, who cares what this religious institution has to say? I know that for a fact some of the greatest thinkers and proponents of artificial intelligence are coming to the Vatican to talk to experts because they see tremendous value here at the Vatican. Although I'm in Phoenix, Arizona right now, but at the Vatican for 2,000 years of reflection on what makes us human, what is it about us that is distinct. And I mean, Sam Altman is coming to the Vatican. We have CEOs and tech executives from Microsoft to Cisco signing documents alongside the Vatican. Pope Leo is going to pick up everything, all this work, which had already started before he became Pope, and start to reflect on what that means for society, what it means for believers. So, and it's going to be it's something that I'm very much looking forward to. I think that as a mathematician, a theologian, a canon lawyer, he can really bring a sort of unique understanding of these issues, and that I already know that some of the greatest thinkers and university professors and movers and shakers in this field are really keen on hearing what the Vatican has to say.
Is there anything else either of you wanted to add on that?
Yeah, let me just say one thing I think is really interesting. This was something I started tracking. He talked about AI, but I wonder if he saw all the AI images of himself. Because what happened once he got there is people were making all these AI images of him, which I thought was a stark contrast between what he's talking about with AI, but how people are envisioning him. And that was just really something to think about. I look at popular culture a lot, but that tells us something about what people are trying to do and how they're trying to connect, and the uses and misuses of AI, right? Because I think one of the biggest things about this is how this can be abused in certain kind of ways. And I'm really excited and hopeful for what he will say in an encyclical about this. But I just wonder if he saw any of this that was going on around him.
I do believe the
What?
Vatican pushed back against some AI generated
Yeah,
content and also fake news that
yeah.
occurred after his election.
Yeah, yeah. And the classic one of AI was the one of Pope Francis in that puffer coat. That
Yes.
was that yeah, that was sort of the beginning of all of this kind of stuff, right? So I think this is one of those kind of moments where it's not just about, the use of it and everything else is, but it's about how do you talk about religious figures? How do you see them, and how do people connect to them? And it's going to be a very interesting time to think about how he will respond to all of that.
Because of the
Can
many
I? Oh,
questions that
go
are
ahead.
being asked, but with regard to the hopes that AI brings with it, but also the many fears that ordinary people have about AI, that's when they look for something a little deeper. I worked for 7 years at the United Nations for the Holy See during Pope Francis' pontificate. And no matter what the question was, many of the nations looked to the Holy See's deeper premises to whatever conclusion it would be, because they knew that the church in particular wasn't so much interested in particular advantages in competition to other states or anything else like this, but we're trying to get to the deeper questions about who we are, how we ought to behave toward each other in some type of social context, etc. And so I think the same type of attitude is being given toward the church to at least hear what it says. People might later say, I reject that, but they at least want to hear what they say about the hopes of AI and its possibilities, which are enormous, but also the legitimation of the various fears that people have. And can we come together so that AI is going to be a resource that will make us stronger as individuals and as peoples, or prevent it from literally destroying us? And so that's why the Pope is going to be the spiritual E.F. Hutton for those of a certain generation, to whom everybody's going to listen to see what he has to say. And I think that that'll form the conversation, just like Pope Francis's Laudato Si about care for our common home did very much influence the international community's approach to environmental concerns.
Monsignor Landry, I did want to ask you about that. We did actually have a question just about this, so we will get to all questions by the end of the hour, or most of them as we can, so please keep putting them in the chat. But Vanessa in Georgetown was actually asking, do we know if this first papal encyclical will be on AI? And she was pointing out that Laudato Si came out, I think it was 2 years after Pope Francis was elected.
Laudato Si came out in 2015, so that was 2 years after he was elected. We have no confirmation yet that Pope Leo is going to be publishing his first encyclical or any encyclical on AI. I can't imagine an encyclical won't come out, but the Pope is going to, in his first encyclical, every Pope wants to lay out the program of his pontificate. So it's possible that Pope Leo would want to do something on one of his other messages that has been regularly sort of stumped throughout the first 6 weeks of his papacy. For example, about peace or about unity. Something like this is a possibility for his first encyclical, so that his entire pontificate that comes later can be framed by that first note. And so we don't know yet what's going to be the first, but I think it's inevitable that he's going to come out with some teaching document on AI. I anticipate that he's going to want to do that, not just by his own study and the experts coming on in. I think he's going to want to do something synodally with regard to the questions and the fears and the input and the experts, to bring them on in before he would ever publish that. And that's going to take some time, just like in Laudato Si, Pope Francis, through Cardinal Turkson, brought in a whole bunch of environmental and climate experts to give that type of input so that it could be synthesized, so that not only the teachings would be relevant in terms of theology, but they would likewise be scientifically accurate.
So I do want to get to the idea of peace and what he has done on that. But first, I just want to go back to the idea that we have this American Pope. And Dr. Butler, I wanted to ask you, as someone who I introduced as a professor of both African American and U.S. religion, if you just like to just talk about that, the significance of this moment for you.
Yeah, it was huge, in part because I'll sort of out myself here. I'm Catholic fourth generation, which I think people would be very surprised about, first of all. But that's because my mother was from Louisiana and all of our ancestors were from Louisiana, right? So one of the first calls I got was actually from my MSNBC editor, who's from New Orleans. He said, everybody's talking about Prevost because he's Creole. And I'm like, I should have known. It's this moment in which it united a lot of things about America, which is, the interracial, the dialogues that people have with each other, the history of slavery. The New York Times just did a big piece about his family tree, going back 500 years, which I think if anybody has not looked at that, maybe we could put that in the chat for everybody. So I think it's a really important look about how you can go back and look at, the descendants and how Catholicism has gone through, especially for African Americans, because we cannot talk about, we can't talk about the history of Catholicism with Black people in America without talking about the history of slavery, right? So that's one thing. I think also his whole family history speaks to something, and that second thing is about the history of the Great Migration. How people ended up in Chicago in the first place, right, and why they ended up there. Following the Mississippi River all the way up and thinking about how, what kind of life could they lead otherwise. And so there's this very big contention and an argument going on within the African American community. Does he claim us? Does he not claim us? And for, people in Louisiana, it was like, he's one of us, right? But I think it speaks to something broader. And I think for me personally, what it spoke to is to think about these complicated histories, the complicated histories that are within the church, the complicated histories of how we have so many different people groups within the church, the idea about enculturalization, how we think about that, and also to say that his time, not just in America, but the time that he spent in Peru is also really important to think about, because all of that brings together all of who he is, so that he could be that person to speak many different languages as he's in front of everybody else on the loggia, and sort of come into the sense of which he could embrace lots of different people. And so for Black Catholics, this was a really important moment. I mean, I want to remind people that we only got the first Black cardinal, which was Wilton Gregory, not that long ago, right, in America. So it's always been a fraught history for African American Catholics, especially in America. So I think this moment was especially important for us.
Claire, what have we heard from the Pope about what he said about his family, about his heritage?
The Pope hasn't really discussed his family heritage publicly, as far as I know. But there'll be a time when we can ask him questions, probably during travel. You know, I would like, though, to answer this question, about his Americanness, because I saw someone in the chat asked if being an American, because of the tumultuous situation in the United States, if that would have been a reason behind his election. And I would answer absolutely not. In fact, I would say that most of the cardinals, the Americanness of Pope Leo or Prevost at the time, would have been against him becoming Pope. But I spoke to several of the cardinals who attended the conclave, and they said that they were quite impressed by the un-Americanness of the cardinal. He did not present as American. They said that one of them, I believe, said that next to like these larger than life figures, like even physically large, like I believe, for example, Cardinal Dolan is very tall and muscular, and there are others, that are these American cardinals that are these kind of bombastic personalities. He sort of was a little smaller and more slight and to the side, more discreet, and that really drew a lot of people towards him. Now, I would also keep in mind that Pope Francis did not like Americans very much. I know this for a fact. It took him a very long time to give an interview to any American. And when we asked him on a plane once, actually, one of my colleagues told him that he was being attacked by certain Americans because of some of his decisions. He said, "I wear it as a badge of honor when I'm criticized by Americans." This is Pope Francis. Now, I think that's because of the background of Pope Francis. I think he had a view of America and its role in the international diplomatic sphere that came very much from his South American perspective. It will be very interesting to see how Pope Leo, especially when it comes to international relations, diplomacy, will interact with us, because he does come behind him, there's been a more fraught relationship with the United States. What is going to happen next? He understands the problems of America. He knows about America's influence. Even when he comes and he will have to address some of the wars that are happening around the world. We talked about peace. We're going to talk about it again. That perspective, that U.S. perspective, which, yes, it's true, he's a naturalized citizen of Peru. But, those first formative years are extremely important in a person. And I think we should not in any way try and discount that. How will that play out in his understanding of Russia? How will that play out in his understanding of the situation in the Middle East? And I think that's something that we will definitely want to keep an eye on, as well as how will he negotiate his relationship with Trump? When is he going to visit if I mean, I imagine, when is he going to visit the United States? These are all big questions that with an American Pope are going to be particularly interesting.
Monsignor Landry, as we think about, like, as we're talking about the Americanness of this, right? Like his family giving interviews. I wanted to just ask you to weigh in on the significance of this and what you're thinking about all of this.
So in the media age, we really haven't had papal siblings. Pope
And
Benedict,
now
of
we do.
course, Pope Benedict, of
Yeah.
course, had an older brother who really didn't give many interviews. He did his speaking as a great musician. But when St. John Paul II became Pope, his siblings had already deceased. Um, when Pope Francis became Pope, his family members were really media shy, and none, as far as I can recall, ever gave a substantive interview. Now you've got his two brothers who are both obviously extrovert, one in Florida who's a big Trump fan, one who used to be a principal of a Catholic school in Illinois, who is much more discreet and everything else, but both saying yes to journalists who are coming to try to get a little bit of context of the one who became Pope Leo XIV. And so that is something new. And I think it's something beautiful, actually, that popes come from real families, families with opinionated people who don't necessarily speak for him, families of brothers who love him and are cheering him on, and able to say things that no pope would ever dare say because they're not pope. And so I think that that's a very interesting familial dimension for one that everybody calls Holy Father. The spiritual family of the church is meant to build on the nature of sort of familial bonds. And the very fact that we can relate to the fact that the Pope isn't dropped from heaven, but comes from earth, and he's got real family members, I think it's going to help us become much more familial in the church.
As we think about just Pope Leo, and just one thing that I wanted to talk to you all about is his age. And as we think about youth and his appeal to youth in particular as well, I was just in France a week or two ago for the Jubilee of Chartres Cathedral, and it was amazing to see 20,000 people who had walked from Paris to Chartres, and the average age was 19 as this celebrating this pilgrimage. And I just want to ask all of you about his appeal to youth, what we're seeing, how much this is invigorating interest. Certainly, we saw Pope Francis also be very popular with younger people. What are we seeing so far from Pope Leo on this?
I will just start by saying I think he's just a very charismatic figure. He's somebody who is genuine, first of all. Second, I've been really impressed on the Sundays, when he goes around to see everyone and he's driving around and there's lots of baby picking up and all of this other stuff. Now, that's one thing. That's things that priests do, right? But I think the other part of it is that there's a youthfulness that's there. We were talking beforehand, so I'm going to bring this up about this moment in which his personal trainer, who had been working out with him for 2 years, saw him up on the loggia and said, "Oh my God, that's the guy I've been working, being personal trainer to for the last 2 years. I didn't know that he was a pope. He would be pope, right? He didn't even know that he was a cardinal." And I think that part of it is really interesting because what we see in him is a youthfulness, a strength. We talked about when he caught the doll of himself, when he was on the papal back of the car, and this was just a classic shot. He's been with Yannick Sinner, tennis player. All of these things, we might think of them as just being fluff, but they're actually not fluff. They're speaking to something about the vibrancy of the church and the vibrancy that I think a lot of us who are, within the church are hoping that goes down to the youth. So I think, between the pilgrimage that you had, the International Youth Days that happened, I think we're going to see from him a real emphasis and a real focus in on youth and actually drawing in youth to the church.
Monsignor Landry, in terms of his age, I think you alluded to this, right? That he has living siblings is just even, I think, a sign of his age and what we can expect.
So he's the first pope we've had since 1990 under the age of 70. And so most people would think of a 69-year-old as an AARP card-carrying member, past retirement age in the US. But by papal standards, he's relatively youthful. But in psychology and spirit, I think Pope Leo is very youthful. Just like Dr. Butler was saying, still exercises. I mean, he's not going quietly into senescence. I mean, he's trying to keep himself young in order to be able to serve. And he's very direct. I mean, this is one of the things that I think makes him appeal to young people. When he spoke 10 days ago to the thousands assembled in White Sox Park in Chicago, he used the second person singular the entire time. And he did so with great hope, not according to the expectations of the age, as the wagging finger of the mystical body saying all that could be said in criticism of young people and some of the choice they're making. No, he said, you are very much the hope for the church and my hope. And he then laid out various reasons why. And so I think young people have been growing. I was the chaplain at Columbia University for the last 3 years, so working with young adults very, very much. They're looking, especially in a post-COVID age that cut them off from communion with so many of their friends. They're looking for the communion, and the church offers something there. With so many people who were dying, at least early in the pandemic, they're looking for some of the answers to the biggest questions and whether God really exists. When scientism was smashed because certain scientists were going beyond their scientific expertise and doing behavioral control and things like that, they were looking, or at least open to other sources of authority, and the church has a candidacy there. Similarly, they wanted to help people, and a lot of the times people aren't entrepreneurial, charitable entrepreneurs, and they look for other groups who are doing things, and the church has done so much to build hospitals and schools and food pantries and you name it. And so it's a particular age that young people are looking for the church to deliver on hopes in an age in which there's so much confusion, so much lack of peace, so many failed leaders. And so they're giving Pope Leo a chance. And so far, to go back to White Sox Park, I think he's hitting a home run.
When we're talking about the idea of his emphasis on peace, just as we think about the conflicts that have popped up just in the past month as he has become Pope, right? We did not have Israel at war with Iran, possibly now a ceasefire. But we, of course, have Israel with Gaza. We have Russia, Ukraine. Claire, what have we seen so far in terms of his message of peace, particularly in regard to first war?
I mean, his first words when he came in front of the crowd gathered at St. Peter's Square as the newly elected Pope Leo was, "Peace be with you all." I mean, and that's been a recurring phrase. And it's this crazy thing that happens when a new pope is elected, and the power of his words is that when they say something, this word ripples and is echoed in so many other places. And so every conference I go to, every event, every gathering, every tour where there are Catholics gathered, that word peace is contagious. And I hear it repeated over and over again. So already the Pope has made his papacy about this concept of peace. And that peace comes through unity. His strongest words probably regarding the wars that are currently happening just came last Sunday, where he said, let's not resign ourselves to a world in war. I think that really shows his really keen understanding of just the sort of spiritual situation that is happening today, the sort of hope for peace, but also this growing desire for war among some, many people. We know this to be true. And he's obviously a very attentive observer of these issues. And we're going to keep seeing him, I'm sure, speaking on behalf of peace, talking about peace. And I think that for him, that peace comes through unity and communion. And it's about dialogue and conversation. We've seen him already, I mean, being very careful, as the Vatican usually does in its diplomacy, with not taking any sides. The Vatican wishes to be a place that can offer mediation, and that means that there's no pointing fingers, there's no accusation, because everyone can come to the Holy See, to the Church, to try and find a middle ground and a place for negotiation. So Pope Francis had appointed this Cardinal Matteo Zuppi, who was also considered a papabile, to be his peace envoy to Ukraine. We now know that Zuppi will continue his role as peace envoy to Ukraine. We know that Pope Leo has conversations with all the people who are right now in Jerusalem, the Patriarch, obviously, who is there, Pizzaballa. He's aware of what's going on the ground. We know is in communication with charitable organizations on the ground and is paying attention to that place. And he has an opportunity to meet with these people. Another thing, let's not forget, when Pope Francis died, just meters away from his casket, Trump and Zelensky sat down face to face to talk about peace. This is a papacy that is coming in at a time of war, where that third world fought piecemeal that Pope Francis constantly warned about is more realistic and imminent than ever. And I think that Francis would have been terrified and concerned about the situation right now. And now we know that Pope Leo, a pope who is interested in the crises, the tensions of our society, he took this name because Rerum Novarum is not just about new things, the Latin word, it's about revolutions. What are the big changes, transformations happening in societies? You can't address this problem without looking at the question of peace and how to maintain that. So it will be everything about this Pope up to this point tells us that he is equipped and he has the spiritual toolkit to address the situation. And we'll just have to see how he does it. I saw someone ask over here about his upcoming trips. That will be a way to understand where his attention is directed. His first trip is expected to be to Nicaea, because this is a very important year in terms of ecumenical relations. And the road for peace for the Catholic Church has often meant relationship with other religions. So that might be a first stepping stone.
Monsignor Landry, Dr. Butler, when we think about what we've seen with the Pope in terms of in the political realm in these first few weeks, what also stands out to you?
I think, like we just heard from Claire, there is an anthropology underneath his peace work. It was similar with Pope Francis, but some of the times you didn't perceive it if you weren't reading things like Fratelli Tutti. But there needs to be this real sense that we're brothers and sisters, that we care about each other, so that we're able to stop the fratricide of Cain versus Abel. And so what we're seeing with Pope Leo is he's trying to get to the human dimensions underneath all of it, so that we're not categorizing each other as enemies that we should get rid of, as if we're aliens from other planets or insects or people who are not able to become brothers. So in subtle ways, he's trying to lay the premises for the conclusions for peace through bringing about a greater union, that we share similar concerns, we share similar hopes, we share similar fears. All the rest of it he's been doing. He, as an Augustinian, has always focused on three things. This is the charism of the Augustinians. The first is unity. The second is charity. The third is truth. And so he wants us to recognize that we're members of the same family. He wants to try to help us minimally not hate each other, but try to work to appreciate each other and love each other, even if we might never like each other. And then third, he wants us to acknowledge that there is a truth about who the other person is, and that this is not somebody whose whole existence is so that we can obliterate or annihilate them, but somebody who cries out to us for some type of human concern. And so that's what we're seeing in his peace work. And I think, to just mention what Claire said at the beginning, when he came out on the balcony, he offered everybody peace, but he likewise said, the peace of the risen Christ be with you. He's not just offering some type of peace as the absence of war. He's trying to offer what he alone can, not just as a statesman, but as a successor of St. Peter, the peace that Jesus, we as Christians believe, came into the world to die, to give, and to leave us. And so I think that he thinks that that's what his biggest contribution will be, to try to teach people a little bit of these principles of Jesus, without which political decisions toward peace are going to be more difficult to achieve.
Dr. Butler, what strikes me about what the Monsignor is talking about is how completely diametrically opposite this is to what we hear from other world leaders, from politicians on the world stage, who are not talking about unity.
Yeah, they're not talking about humanity, let's put it like that, because we've walked very close this week to an all-out breakout in the Middle East. And I actually feel very sorry for Pope Leo, because I think that he has more on his plate than he could have ever imagined, not just with Israel and Gaza or with, Russia and Ukraine, but now he has this other situation with Iran. He has a situation that, we still have the continuation of Sudan. We have a lot of places in the world that are blowing up. But I think one of the things that is very important to point out is that he is going to have to, at some point, and I'm not sure when that point is, there will be a point where he puts a finger in somebody's chest. And, Pope Francis was good at doing that, right? He could always be very pointed. Now, that doesn't mean that, world leaders will move, but I think this is sort of this is the nice period, right? Where he's not, he can say these kinds of things about peace and everything, but there will come a moment where people will be very upset. And I think, if I'm thinking about this from an American perspective, I think about all the delicate behaviors of what happened with JD Vance and with Trump and everyone else. And there's going to be a moment. And when that moment happens, I think that will say a lot about how his papacy will go, because there is so much division and dissent and war going on right now. And there are more atrocities that are happening every day to people. And there comes a moment where the church will speak out very forcefully and strongly, and he will be the one to say that in one of the Sunday messages, that is going to happen. And I am very interested to see what will happen then.
Let's get to some of the audience questions. Elfredi, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, asks, since Francis named the majority of voting cardinals, why should Prevost be such a surprise? In connection to this, Francis named Prevost cardinal in 2023. What does this say about his reputation among the cardinals? How did he achieve this strong status so quickly?
This is a great question. I'd love to jump on it.
Sure.
Because it's something I've been reporting on and paying attention to as well. The question really is, did Pope Francis anoint Prevost as his successor? And I think that there are some signs. He was not just made a cardinal in 2023. He was made the highest rank of cardinal that you can be. And he was appointed to one of the most influential positions within the Vatican. That is a position that helps the Pope decide who will be bishop. Normally, whoever occupies that position at the Vatican is automatically considered as being a successor to the Pope, because it's a position that gives you an understanding of how the Vatican works and of the global church. It was, in fact, only the fact that he was American that did not put him on top of everyone's list. So there's that thing. And then I had this very interesting conversation recently with this a prominent member of the Augustinian order. This is the order that Pope Leo belongs to. And he said that he met Pope Francis during an audience. This is early on in the pontificate. And he walked up to the Pope. They had a greeting, and the Pope said, "So what kind of Augustinian are you?" And he said, "Well, I'm just, the regular Augustinian order." And he answered like, "No, do you follow Prevost? Are you under Prevost?" And he said, well, yes, because Prevost had influential role and prominent role within the Augustinian order. And Pope Francis apparently looked at him and said, Prevost, keep an eye on him. So obviously, this man was someone who Pope Francis looked to as a good leader and a good person who had an understanding of the church. And in many ways, he was a missionary, but he also was at the head of the Augustinian order, which allowed him to get this sort of global sense of almost the 50 countries where the order is present. And there's another thing that's kind of interesting about this relationship. Pope Leo himself admitted that initially the relationship between himself and Pope Francis was a little bit tense. It was a little bit, there were some divisions. We're not very clear about what those tensions might have been about, but they obviously changed over time. And there's something to say about relationships that start with a little friction and then they become an obvious friendship. That sometimes those are the most truthful and lasting relationships that we can have. And at the same time, we also know that Pope Leo had his mind changed as he was a cardinal by Pope Francis. Pope Leo had a much more,
Mm.
I don't want to say conservative, but perhaps orthodox view of the Catholic Church. He was a little bit, he pushed back against certain aspects, I would say, for example, gay marriage or other things. We know of some of his comments, we've seen it. And then when he was interviewed years later after becoming a cardinal, and he was asked, how do you think, what is your thinking about these topics? After hearing Pope Francis and synodality and everything, how have you changed? And he said, yes, my views have changed on this. So this was obviously a relationship that was transformative for both. And I think, though we can't definitely say that Pope Francis wanted Prevost to become Pope, I think he would not be disappointed.
Do either of you want to weigh in, or we can go to the next question if not?
No, we can move on.
So this question is either for Monsignor or Dr. Butler from Donna. How likely is it, do you think, that Pope Leo will canonize the Black American candidates for sainthood, given that they meet the miracle requirement? For example, Sisters Bowman and Henriette DeLilly, especially from New Orleans.
Henrietta DeLille, please.
DeLille, sorry.
Let me pronounce her name correctly, because you will have every Creole person in Louisiana screaming at
Thank
you right
you.
now. Okay,
Henriette
sorry.
DeLille. Thank you.
Sister
No,
Henrietta
I
DeLille.
appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Say that she's a sister too, because this is really important. I hope so. This is, I have to say this because there's been, a big devotion to Sister Henrietta DeLille and to Sister Thea Bowman, but especially to Henrietta DeLille, especially for Black Louisiana Catholics. So it will be a toss up, but, I'm hoping both of them could come in. I know there is a process, people can go read about this later about how you make a saint. But yes, I think so. And we're actually, I want to bring up somebody else in the midst of this too. Carlo Acutis, who was supposed to be canonized that week that Pope Francis died, which is, a very interesting one given technology and everything else. So I think we're going to see a different set of saints this time around. And when I was thinking about this in terms of John Paul II, there were lots and lots of people being canonized. It was almost like a freight train of people being canonized all the time, right? And so I'm interested to see how this process will go under this Pope.
Monsignor?
I'd just say there is a process that's followed. If the miracles happen, I think he will be absolutely ecstatic to be able to beatify and then hopefully canonize both of them. I'd likewise just put out there Father Augustus Tolton from Chicago, who was one of the real trend-setting Black priests in the country, to whom priests of whatever race look to with great admiration. He would obviously know Father Tolton very well from likewise growing up in Chicago. And so we pray for the beatification of all of them.
We have a question from Celia, who says, we in the US are witnessing the collapse of democratic institutions and the persecution of immigrants. When can we expect either the US Church or the Pope to direct their attention to these issues, as it has done with abortion? We've already seen quite a few statements about immigrants. Who wants to answer that question?
I will. I think you're going to see more. I think in this particular case, I want to point out what we talked about earlier, the three new appointees that were also immigrants to the US, right? Bishop appointees. And what just happened last weekend with the new bishop in San Diego, who actually went with immigrants to their court hearings, and ICE had to leave, right? And so I think you should think about this as sort of Pope Francis kind of stacked the deck before he left. And we're going to continue to see appointments of people who are going to be thinking about how do we deal with the issue of immigration. We have to go back and remember, what was Pope Francis's first visit? It was to Lampedusa, where that was the island of immigrants, right outside of Rome. So I think this is going to continue to be a very big concern for the church, and a big concern because there were just numbers done that if we continue to have the kind of deportations that we have, many members of the Catholic Church in America will be, diffused out of this country. And I think that's going to be a big issue for the coming months and years that we have to think about within the church, at least in the United States.
I'd add, I don't think we're going to be hearing that much directly from Pope Leo about U.S. context, because that's a general principle that the Holy Father wants to allow the bishops in the country to be real leaders, to be bishops. And when we look at the U.S. bishops, where they're clearly united is on what's wrong. we will get clear statements against rating people from their work sites, going on, like some of the stuff that we've been seeing. That's easy for them to do. They're all pretty much on the same page. Where they're not on the same page is what are the positive things that we need to do about immigration reform? What are the steps that are there? Because they're somewhat divided on what's prudentially going to be more important, more more wise, this type of stuff. And so they're going to be the ones who need to lead. They're sensing that they've got to step up to the moment. They absolutely want to show the unity of the body. But I think that that goes step by step. And I think that that's what we're going to be seeing over the next year.
So I have one last question for you all as we just have a few minutes left to wrap up. Monsignor Landry, you have already had an audience with the Pope. And Dr. Butler, I want to ask you, like, if you were to have an audience with Pope Leo, what would you say to him are the most important things he should be focusing on?
This is going to come out of two things for me. One is the writing that I've done on the church over the years, and second, the issues that I know people have had with the church. And I would want to talk to him about the issue of abuse in the Catholic Church, point blank. That would be my number one. That would be my number one topic, and not because I want to make that a topic of dissent, but a topic of how do we continue to talk about this and how do we continue to root this out? Because I think it's really important. He's had to deal with some of this in Peru already, so this will not be something that would be foreign to him at all. But I also think it was something that Pope Francis started and that he could take a ways further. And I think it would be very important. The second thing would be obviously about women. I don't ever personally want to be ordained, but I think that, for a lot of women, this issue is going to be something. I don't think the church is going to change in the next 100 years. So people just understand I'm a church historian and I understand the church. Okay. But I also think that women make a profound number of people in the church, and we have to think about what kind of roles will they take. And that was something that was very important during the synod. And people talked about this, and I think it will continue to be an issue.
When I spoke to Pope Leo, I was speaking in terms of my capacity as National Director of the Pontifical Mission Society. He was meeting with the various national rectors from all over the world. So I did speak to him about the missions. But the other thing that I said to him was that your fellow Americans, Catholics in particular, are really eager to help you. That just as you were baptized with the water there in Chicago, that you grew up from our soil, we have not only contributed to your vocation as a Christian, as a priest, and now as the Holy Father, but we want to contribute to your success as well. Please challenge us to step up to the plate with you. He was grateful for that message. And, I would love to have him speak in our straightforward American English, just saying, I need your help. Please help me, because I think American Catholics from all over would respond with great enthusiasm to that appeal.
Claire, is there anything you wanted to add as we wrap up here, what you're working on next?
I'd like to answer one of the questions that was in the chat. It was about appointments.
Oh, yes. Sorry, I missed that one. Yes, go ahead.
The Pope obviously followed the tradition of, keeping the status quo. And the moment a Pope dies, immediately most of the head of Vatican departments called dicasteries lose their job immediately. But the Pope, followed the usual tendency to leave them in their position while he sort of looks at everyone and who is occupying what position. And he's already made a few changes that I think are quite interesting. Who will take on his job as the head of the bishops is going to be very interesting. And I think it sort of touches on what Dr. Butler was talking about, because first of all, we've seen that in his appointments, Pope Leo, and even when he was a cardinal Prevost, likes to hire people from within the institution, people who understand that place, who have been secretaries, who have been undersecretaries. So he looks at, or even a diocese, he would look at a vicar, for example. So it would be interesting, and I expect him that he would hire someone who he worked with when he was at the head of the dicastery for bishops. And it could be, I'm just throwing out there because it's legal now within the Vatican, it could be one of the 3 women who were hired under his watch to help him oversee the department. Now, and looking at, the appointments that he will make, I mean, not just within the bishop's dicastery, but also the other ones will be very, very interesting. Of course, Secretary of State. So whoever will take on that role, we should pay a lot of attention to, because it says a lot about who the Pope surrounds himself with in making decisions. And this is a Pope who already we have seen is very collegial, who likes to listen to other people. That's what everyone I interview tells me about him. He listens to you, he takes your input, and wants to work shoulder to shoulder with you to make in the church. So I just wanted to offer this answer because it's something I'm also very interested in.
Thanks for that, Claire. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. A reminder, we have recorded this. It's going to be available tomorrow. We would love it for you to share with people who are interested. Our next event, we are convening. We are now done for the summer. We'll be back in the fall on September 16th. We'll be talking with popular podcasters of faith about how they're handling this political moment. Sarah Holland and Beth Silvers from Pantsuit Politics, Wisdom and Practices, Simranjeet Singh, and RNS is Saved by the City's Roxanne Stone will be with you all. We popped a link in the chat to register. And just a reminder, if you're not already following RNS on social media, please be sure to do so. You can also sign up for our newsletters to get the latest religion news and reporting from Claire right in your inbox. I will stay here for another minute to say, make sure everyone has access to those links as I thank our guests for being with us, RNS Vatican reporter Claire Giangrave, Dr. Anthea Butler, the Geraldine R. Seagirl, professor in American social thought at the University of Pennsylvania, and Monsignor Roger Landry, who is National Director of the Pontifical Mission Societies in the United States. Thank you all for being with us, and thanks for being in this conversation with me.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.